It's Ethan. Just wanted to leave a message. I'm heading to Louisiana. Mia got in touch and asked me to pick her up. After 3 long years, I can finally see her again. I kept thinking I should give up, but she's alive. I can't wait any longer to see her, so I'm leaving right away. Anyways, I don't know how long I'm gonna be far away, but until then, see ya.
Arriving in Louisiana, Ethan instantly begins trekking his way through the swamp around him in search of Mia. However, the only house in sight seems completely abandoned, so Ethan must head deeper into the swamp until he's able to find the guest house. Whilst on his way there, a man can be spotted skulking around in the distance. Usually this wouldn't be too concerning, but considering the weird cult-like shit surrounding Ethan, nobody would trust this man. And upon reaching the guest house, it's clear to see this place is filthy. The kitchen is chocked full of rotten bug-infested food. The walls are covered in damp and mold. The developers managed to make this house feel extremely real. Take one look at any real abandoned location and you'll instantly see the similarities. Sometimes places look trapped in stasis. The house may be crumbling, but it's still a home. The family photos littered around the living room, the food that's still sitting on the table. This house feels like it was abandoned in mere moments, but of course, this house isn't abandoned. Whilst in the living room, a tape from the show Sewer Gators can be viewed. This tape shows a group of men exploring the guest house until cameraman Clancy Jarvis enters the basement, where he finds another host dead. After an unknown man begins walking into frame, the feed cuts out and the tape ends. The tapes in RE7 are incredible. They expand upon the story and prepare Ethan for what's coming next. For example, the first tape shows you how to enter the guest house basement. You don't have to watch these tapes in order to progress, but if you've never played Resident Evil 7 before, then I'd highly recommend doing so. Anyways, Ethan is now able to access the basement, a place almost completely flooded with sickly green water that you must traverse through whilst looking for Mia, and forcing Ethan to submerge half of his face when ducking under some wooden supports gives the player an extremely claustrophobic feeling that also builds tension really well. Eventually, a corpse does rise from the water. It's not the greatest jump scare, but its build-up is extremely nerve-wracking, so I don't mind all too much. After emerging, Ethan may continue exploring the basement, however his search for Mia has just about come to an end. In the next room, Ethan finds Mia locked up. She's been confined to a cell with dirty mattresses lining the walls and one shitty bed for her to rest on. By this point, it should be crystal clear to everyone playing that Mia is here against her will. And speaking to Mia, it's obvious that she's not all there. She doesn't know whether or not she even asked you to come pick her up, and she won't stop talking about someone named Daddy. Now, if I were in Ethan's shoes, I'd be panicking, and honestly, I'm surprised he isn't. His wife has been missing for years, and he's found her in the same basement that he's just found a corpse in. Really, Ethan, what's wrong with you? Anyways, Mia begins frantically trying to find somewhere for Ethan to escape to, but something's definitely off about her. She's constantly panicked, but then out of seemingly nowhere, she breaks through that fear and confusion to explain that
it's not here. It's gone. It's gone. We're gonna be a family now that you're here.
It's very strange, but of course Ethan ignores everything and goes off to look for an exit, which goes pretty terribly. Whilst Ethan is looking around, Mia can be heard screaming from the other room. However, after checking on her, she's already disappeared and the wall previously blocking the exit is now gone. But even after heading upstairs, Mia is nowhere to be found, so we'll need to retrace our steps. Heading back downstairs into the darkness, Ethan is eventually stopped in his tracks. Mia's silky black hair can be seen dragging along the creaky wooden steps as she crawls towards you. After standing up, her face becomes completely visible. But this isn't Mia. This couldn't be Mia. This thing can't even be human, right? Her skin is pale and dirty, her jaw looks unhinged, her eyes feel hollow. Everything about Mia is different. This isn't the scared girl we found earlier. This thing is some kind of monster. Now, if her uncanny appearance wasn't enough to convince you of that, then don't worry, cause she'll prove it by lifting Ethan and throwing him up the stairs. After getting back to his feet, Ethan instantly begins getting attacked by Mia. She throws him to the ground and starts slashing at his arms before using her knife to rip straight through his hand. It's brutal to say the least. Even when pushed away, she runs right back and continues her onslaught until coming to her senses. Well, not completely. She's stopped attacking Ethan, but that doesn't mean she's all there. After dropping the knife, Mia starts talking about someone.
I can hear her. I can feel her clawing her way back inside of me. Get out! Leave me alone! I've been bad. I deserve this.
Ethan's in shock at the moment. He's found his wife imprisoned inside of some disgusting house out in the middle of nowhere, and after freeing her, she attacks him and shatters her own skull, all within a relatively short amount of time. But hold on, she isn't finished just yet. Approaching her body causes her to rise from the floor like some form of vampire and then throw Ethan through a wall. I imagine Ethan is getting tired of being thrown around, but this time it's actually worth something. An axe can be found lying on the floor next to Ethan, whilst Mia stumbles towards him, knife in hand. With no other choice but to defend himself, Ethan begins violently swinging the axe in Mia's direction. However, Ethan wasn't even slightly prepared to kill Mia, so after lodging the axe in her throat, Ethan is absolutely devastated, but the sound of ringing from just down the hall is enough to distract him, so Ethan marches over to the source of the noise to check who's calling. A woman named Zoe instructs Ethan to escape via the attic, but whilst on the phone, Mia has gone missing, so we're trying to escape whilst being stalked throughout the house, and when Mia does catch you, it's not exactly the most pleasant experience. She forces your hand up against the wall and then proceeds to shove a screwdriver straight through it, before walking away to grab a chainsaw. You're able to pull at the screwdriver in hopes of unlodging it, but no matter how hard you try, it's impossible to escape in time. Mia's chainsaw makes contact with Ethan's wrist, therefore leaving him with only one hand and a stump. But thankfully, Mia walks away. She could have killed Ethan if she'd kept attacking, so it's clear that she's not too far gone. Anyways, Ethan climbs into the attic and finds himself a gun before exiting. Now, I'd say that's pretty lucky because Mia shows up for one final standoff. She chases Ethan through the attic, chainsaw in hand, whilst you're able to fire back at her. The fight isn't too difficult normally, but switch the game to Madhouse mode and this fight becomes terrifyingly difficult. After shooting Mia repeatedly, she'll eventually drop to the floor, leaving Ethan devastated yet again. He's been forced to kill his wife twice in one night, but Ethan isn't given any time to process his feelings, as a few moments later clanking noises can be heard all around, until he shows up.
Welcome to the family, son.
After being punched, Ethan begins slipping in and out of consciousness, whilst being dragged back to the house from earlier. Ethan eventually wakes up with his previously severed arm now stitched back on and held down to a chair, whilst dinner begins. The dinner scene in Resident Evil 7 is one of my favourite moments from any video game. However, I'm unsure as to whether or not my description of the scene will do it justice. The lighting of this scene is both dim and warm, but this cozy dinner is interrupted by the cruel and almost soulless light coming from the kitchen, and you have to wonder whether or not the food you're being served was actually prepared in that very kitchen. After all, the food looks like it was ripped straight from the guest house, certainly not something a happy family would be dining on. But above all else, I'd like to focus on the Baker family. Sitting across from Ethan is Jack Baker, a man with very good taste in weapons, and the main reason I'm making this video. Sitting to the left of Jack is Lucas Baker. He likes throwing food, hosting parties, and making bombs. To the right of Jack is Marguerite Baker. She's covered in more bugs than her shitty food, and her boss fight is disgusting, but we've still got one more Baker to go. Sitting right next to Ethan is Grandma Baker. Yes, that's definitely her name, and I'm not just hiding her real name because it's a spoiler. I would never do such a thing. Anyways, the scene begins rising in severity after Lucas flings a plate full of food directly at Ethan's head. This action sparks an extremely violent reaction from Jack, who uses a knife to saw off Lucas's arm. But the most concerning thing about this is Lucas's reaction. His arm has just been torn off, but he isn't expressing any sign of pain. He just says in an annoyed tone of voice,
Yes.
The Bakers are clearly demented, but it gets even worse. After cutting off Lucas's arm, Jack begins making his way around the table so Ethan can have some food. However, I think you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find someone that would actually eat the pig slop Marguerite made, and Ethan isn't any exception. After Jack attempts to force some food into Ethan's mouth, he instantly spits it out, causing Marguerite to lose her bloody marbles before leaving the room. It's safe to say that we've insulted the whole family, so Jack, out of anger, slices Ethan's mouth open, and he'd probably have done more damage if someone didn't ring the doorbell. Jack and Lucas both leave to check who's at the door, giving Ethan enough time to break free of his restraints. But it's not long until we encounter Jack again, only this time he's carrying a snow shovel that can definitely mess you up. If you're too slow whilst avoiding him, then he'll use his shovel to rip off Ethan's leg, only to crouch in front of him and wait as Ethan attempts to reattach his leg. And yes, that is possible in RE7. It's moments just like this that make Jack an incredible villain. I wouldn't exactly describe myself as some huge Resident Evil fan. I've played RE2 and RE8, so not that much. But I've noticed that each game has at least one section where you're trapped with a pursuer. Although unlike Lady Dimitrescu or Mr. X, Jack is actually really threatening. Probably the best out of the three. The others just come across as annoying. You're avoiding them because of how powerful they are and the fact they represent a possible death. However, that doesn't apply to Jack, and I think it's primarily due to his design. The other two are given very monstrous designs that fail to make them look scary. Mr. X looks like some form of Sam Sulek clone, and Lady Dimitrescu was made way too beautiful for people to actually be scared of her. The point I'm trying to make is that both of their designs are too cool. They both look like supervillains, but the same thing doesn't apply to Jack. He looks human. Now, I might be diving a little too deep here, but I think that's worse than any form of monster. Upon meeting Jack, it's obvious that he isn't normal, but we're able to view him as human due to his appearance, so even if only for a brief time, it's possible to consider his existence a real possibility. It's not like his actions should suggest otherwise. All his cruelty is completely possible for a human, and let's be honest, humans are definitely more messed up than most monsters. Anyways, the story continues to progress once Ethan finds a police officer knocking on a nearby window, who instructs him to make his way down into the garage, but after getting there, things don't go too well. Jack shows up just behind the officer, and with his snow shovel in hand, he slices off half of the poor man's brain. It's absolutely vile, but yet again, we're not really given any time to process what just happened, as Ethan has no escape route. With no exit in sight, Ethan must fight Jack in order to escape, which would have gone terribly if the officer wasn't there. Ethan is able to grab the now deceased officer's gun and fend off Jack while searching for his car keys. Now, I don't really know why Ethan thought this would go well, but either way, it's still super cool. Basically, Ethan gets in his car and begins crashing it into Jack over and over again, but it should be clear by this point that Jack isn't normal, so even if Ethan does run him over, it'll have zero effect. Eventually, Jack will rip the top of Ethan's car clean off, and then take the wheel himself. After taking over, Jack drives the car straight into some steel girders in an attempt to smash Ethan's face to pieces, but thankfully he's able to dodge. The same can't be said for Jack, however, who takes a girder directly to the chin, but believe it or not, that still isn't enough to bring good old Daddy Baker down. It takes the car literally exploding for Jack to finally drop. He's very durable, but not even he can withstand an explosion, so after dropping to the floor, Ethan can now escape the garage. Well, not before Jack shows him something beautiful.
Do I have your attention, boy? You're about to see something wonderful. Fuck!
After shooting himself, Jack is officially dead, for real this time, and Ethan is given access to the rest of the baker's home. From here on, Ethan is basically just tasked with finding the dog heads so he can make an escape from the main house. It's really easy with Jack out of the picture, but what about the other bakers? Well, after viewing another VHS tape, we learn that Marguerite is actually searching for Mia on another part of the Baker estate, and Lucas is nowhere to be found, so there's no one to stop Ethan from escaping. Okay, so I may have lied to all of you. Jack isn't actually dead, and after exploring the baker's bathroom, he makes that very clear by bursting through the door and grabbing Ethan by the throat, whilst his head grows back. Now, that's cool and all, but can we all just stop and appreciate how cool Jack's weapon is? This man is carrying some form of paint roller covered in spikes, and it looks so unbelievably cool. You may think I'm overreacting, but I disagree. They could have given him anything, but instead they purposely chose weapons that would complement his handyman sort of vibe. Also, it's just really creative. Like, imagine if he'd walked in with an axe. I wouldn't even be talking about this if he'd done so, because it wouldn't so much as leave an impression. But enough about weapons, as this script is already massive and we're still only on chapter 1. So let's continue with Ethan's escape from the main house. From here on, it's basically just a game of cat and mouse where Jack hunts Ethan down as he attempts to escape. But Jack isn't the only enemy we'll need to worry about. Whilst looking around, we're introduced to another major enemy we'll be seeing all throughout the game, known as the Molded. In the other 2 Resident Evil games I've played, the average enemy resembles either zombies or werewolf creatures. I don't have anything against them, but the Molded are just much better. As their name implies, they're born from masses of filthy black mold extruding from all over the Baker residence. The Molded themselves look like they're constructed out of thick, meaty tendrils, except for their gaping jaws full of jagged and brutish teeth, capable of gnawing through flesh and bone. Overall, these creatures are much greater than simple zombies. Zombies have been overused to the point where they've become trivialized. As time has gone on, it's become more clear that zombies are not of any actual threat, so series and video games have tried introducing a variety of zombies that would be more difficult to handle, but even if they're crawling or giant, they're still just the same thing with a different skin. But the Molded are completely different. They may still resemble zombies on some level, but look deeper and you'll realize their only similarity is in their behavior. Aside from that, they're wholly unique, but I'm mainly fond of their design. I talked about their design not long ago because I believe it's their best aspect. Zombies usually look like humans with pale skin and blood all over their clothing, but of course, the Molded look nothing like that. They're barely even humanoid, and on most occasions, that would be less scary in my opinion, but not this time. Zombies don't strike any real fear within me because it's all been done before. They're not surprising and therefore not scary, so their design can no longer help them. I wouldn't exactly say the Molded are the most terrifying things out there, but at least they tried doing something original that paid off every so often. Anyways, whilst moving through the mold-ridden basement underneath the main house, Ethan is met with multiple abnormal rooms that show just how cruel the Baker family really are. Eventually, Ethan can find his way into the morgue, where he'll be forced to confront Jack again. Now, this fight is just too intense and falls into the same trap as most Resident Evil games that end up prioritizing action over horror, but that's fine, cause Jack has another sick weapon. Jack starts trying to snip Ethan in half using a pair of colossal scissors that look as if they're made out of steel plates that have been crudely woven together, so this fight doesn't need to be scary. Jack's choice of weapons easily makes up for it, but sadly, everyone's favourite weapon enthusiast must finally come to an end. I'm not lying this time. After Jack grabs his trusty pair of scissors, Ethan retaliates by grabbing a nearby chainsaw that can be used against him. However, this chainsaw still takes its sweet ass time when killing Jack. I swear it takes like 20 bloody swings with this stupid thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Jack was wearing Havel's armor with the amount he can tank. But no, his ridiculous endurance aside, Jack does eventually die after Ethan obliterates his torso, which means there's no one left to stop Ethan from escaping the main house. So after finding every dog head, Ethan can finally leave. But this nightmare isn't over just yet. The night is still young and the bakers are still standing, so we've got a lot of work to do. Walking out into the baker's front yard, Ethan staggers his way towards a lone caravan sitting out in the mud, but after entering we're met with another call from Zoe, who explains to Ethan that her and Mia are contaminated, and if they'd like to escape this hell, then they'll need a cure.
I don't get this. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us? First I find Mia running around with some stupid fucking chainsaw, then I get punched in the face by that psycho killer Jack, and now I've got to find some stupid cure to this mold stuff. None of this makes any sense, but I'm not gonna fucking die here. I'll get Mia to normal, and then we can both go home.
To make this cure, they'll need Ethan to raid the old house in search of ingredients, but in doing this, he'll likely encounter Marguerite, also known as that crazy bitch from earlier. But with no other choice, Ethan will just have to suck it up and head on over. Upon making his way to the old house, we're able to see baby dolls dangling from above, almost like some form of threat to anyone who dares enter Marguerite's dilapidated abode, which looks even worse than the guest house. Forget bug-infested food, this place has wonderful sights like flooding and nondescript bug nests so big that Ethan will have to maneuver around them. But after exploring the old house for some time, Ethan will find himself an absolutely lovely flamethrower, perfect for melting any pesky nests blocking his path. But Ethan couldn't possibly have suspected that one of these nests would be hiding a secret room. Oh, and it gets even better. When investigating this room, Ethan finds none other than Mia trapped behind a metal gate. However, she's given no time to explain what's going on before Lucas appears.
Dad, right? You mind if I borrow Mommy for a little bit? Don't just stand there. Do something!
Ethan, help!
And it gets even worse. Marguerite shows up with her army of bugs ready to cover you in bite marks. But hold up, Marguerite is actually really easy to deal with. Unlike Jack, who attacks swiftly and heavily, Marguerite doesn't. If anything, she just stumbles from place to place alongside her bugs. If you have entomophobia, then you'd probably consider her scary, but if not, she just kinda feels like some random old lady that sometimes rambles on about a girl named Evie. And due to how weak she is, we don't really have to worry about her whilst Ethan makes his way through the old house. Well, that is until Marguerite decides to grab Ethan and throw him down a hole, which forces you to confront her, although I'd be lying if I said this fight was difficult. Marguerite doesn't exactly do anything different, she basically just sits there and insults you while getting blasted. So this fight is over really quickly, which leaves Ethan to explore the second floor that Marguerite previously stopped us from entering. However, this doesn't exactly go to plan, because Marguerite is still holding on to the key needed to advance, which means Ethan will quickly need to retrieve it, and of course, Marguerite is back up. Just like Jack, she's also really durable, and with some spider-like limbs, she's ready for round 2. Following her will lead you to another section of the main house known as the greenhouse, and after entering this section, it'll be time for the most difficult fight in all of RE7, and one of the grossest boss designs I've ever seen. Whilst making your way upstairs, Marguerite comes bursting through the window to grab Ethan by the leg, although she backs off after a few shots to the face, but she'll quickly return to show off her distorted body. Her limbs are elongated and her flesh looks rotten, but the main thing that makes her so grotesque is the fact that she has a nest growing out of her crotch. Throughout Marguerite's entire fight, you'll be able to view her crawling all over the place, while the nest attached to her drags along the decaying wooden floor, and she'll constantly be followed by multiple bugs that would love nothing more than to swarm Ethan like he's one huge bin bag. This fight can also last for ages. If Jack was wearing Havel's armor, then Marguerite is wearing Havel's armor whilst also having the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman equipped, because she eats up bullets like No Face at an all-you-can-eat buffet. And yes, I will stop with the references. So this fight will basically drain all of your resources, and I'm trying not to focus on stuff like that, as I'd primarily like to focus on story and horror, but I think having less resources is important for the next part of the game. Sometimes Resident Evil can suffer from giving you too many items, cause it just fills the player with way too much confidence. It's annoying not being able to use some of your weapons, but it makes the game scarier, so I'm okay with that. Anyways, the battle comes to an end with Marguerite writhing in pain before transforming into some form of crystal structure and crumbling right in front of Ethan. Although it's pretty difficult to focus on her death, because they purposely made Marguerite sit in a way where we're forced to stare at her stupid crotch nest. But let's try and ignore that, shall we, as it's time to make a cure. Ethan walks back to the old house and makes his way upstairs only to find the scariest section of RE7. We're very quickly able to realise the second floor is a nursery of some kind that's covered in mould. The reason I like this section so much is that it builds dread. It's eerily quiet, so when something happens it feels deafeningly loud, and it's so dark that Ethan's hand wouldn't even be visible without a torch. Eventually, we're able to find a hidden door at the furthest end of the nursery that hides an ingredient needed for Zoe's cure, but after taking it, you'll just about spot a child before they run out of sight. Is Ethan going insane, or was there actually a child there? Couldn't be. After all, molded begin coming out of every single nook and cranny merely seconds later. But with very few resources on hand, Ethan isn't left with too many options other than running for his dear life. Molded aren't able to open doors, so if you're able to just avoid them, then I'd suggest doing that, cause fighting all of them will only take up even more resources that you simply don't have. But if you do manage to escape, then you'll be golden. Ethan can head back to the caravan and finally make a cure with Zoe. If only it were that easy. After reaching the caravan, Ethan will become enraged upon the realization that Zoe isn't there, but not for long. After hearing the same ringing noise once again, Ethan picks up the phone only to be met with Lucas's voice. He's kidnapped Mia and Zoe, so Ethan is forced to get them both back.
Somehow I took out that ugly bitch, Marguerite, along with those stupid bugs of hers, but I wasn't able to stop Lucas from taking Mia. At the very least, I know where she is. Only one more member of this insane family, and it'll be all over.
Lucas, the most sinister member of the Baker family, has taken both Mia and Zoe, giving him complete control over Ethan, who is forced to make his way around the main house in search of 2 keycards, which will need to access the testing area. But the house is far more dangerous than before. The molded are everywhere and more powerful than before. Some of them are deformed, while some of them only crawl and leap towards you, but it's their numbers that are really concerning. There are molded around every corner, and Ethan doesn't have enough bullets to kill them all, so you'll need to sneak around them if you'd like to avoid getting surrounded. But aside from the molded, we're also gifted with an array of Val creations prepared by Lucas, like the officer's body. Ethan is forced to reach into the headless neck of that very same policeman from earlier in order to find a key. By this point, it should be brutally obvious that RE7 does not mess around when it comes to gore. I usually don't like seeing injuries. They normally make my skin crawl, but I believe that a certain level of gore can be beneficial in horror media. Although RE7 can go overboard every so often. This key moment is alright, but sometimes it can feel slapstick, so instead of making me feel uncomfortable, it just comes across as funny. But outside of a few scenes, it's done pretty well. Anyways, after searching around the main house for some time, Ethan will eventually have every keycard necessary to enter the testing area, and Lucas decides to record a nice little greeting for him. In this video we're able to hear Lucas complaining about Zoe and ripping his own nails off to show just how special he is, but the most interesting thing about this video is the fact that Lucas is talking to someone.
What? What, Evelyn? I'm just trying to show him. I'm just trying to show him not everybody wants to go back to how things were. There's a stupid bitch. She doesn't understand that I don't want to go back to how things were before my father found y'all.
We're unsure who this Evelyn person is. It's safe to assume that she's the same girl Jack and Marguerite were talking about earlier, although for all Ethan knows, Evelyn could just be Lucas's imaginary friend. So after the video ends and the TV showing it explodes, Ethan makes his way inside. The testing area is packed to the brim with explosives created by none other than Lucas himself, but the bombs are just the beginning. After Ethan makes his way deeper into this labyrinth-like place, we're eventually confronted by Lucas, but we're unable to reach him. He stood right behind a locked door that requires a password to enter, something that Ethan obviously doesn't have. But that's fine, Lucas is kind enough to give Ethan the password.
I know. Fucking password, right? Why don't you try 0814? No! 0621. No, it's 0514.
It shouldn't be too surprising to find out that Lucas is lying, so when those girders swing towards Ethan, you'll likely be able to dodge, and right after this near-death experience, Ethan can enter the barn, where we'll be facing the strongest molded yet. After messing around with some sort of generator, the lights cut out before Lucas announces the beginning of the barn fight. Light starts shining down on Ethan as that thing slowly makes its descent into the barn, which has been transformed into an arena that Ethan will have to escape from by pummeling this big boy. Which isn't actually that hard. He's way more powerful than your average molded, but it's just him. Even with all of his extra skills, he isn't enough to stop Ethan, and once he's down, we're then able to use the elevator that chunky boy was just using moments ago, which leads Ethan to a familiar face. Clancy Jarvis, the cameraman from the beginning of RE7, can be found completely charred, with a note strapped to his chest that details the password Ethan needs to advance. But if we'd like to continue, we'll need to find another tape that shows how Clancy ended up like this, and how Ethan can avoid ending up the same way. The tape titled Happy Birthday shows Clancy being locked in the room that we're trying to enter. It's an escape room constructed by Lucas that isn't meant to be fair. Whilst playing through this tape, you'll very quickly realise this escape room is impossible. It will always end with someone being burnt alive. But here's the thing, Ethan knows how Lucas's game works, so he'll be able to conquer it. After entering Lucas's game, Ethan is able to overcome every little challenge that may be thrown at him. There really isn't anything that Lucas can come up with that will stop Ethan, and outside of his traps, he's basically powerless. His mother and father are both extremely dangerous. They are able to endure massive amounts of damage and hit like trucks, but the second Lucas may be confronted by Ethan, he runs away, which allows Ethan to head straight on over to Mia and Zoe. There's a couple of molded on the way, but they're very easy to get around, so finally Ethan can save his wife. After untying Zoe, we instantly give her the ingredients and then head over to untie Mia while Zoe prepares the cure. Nothing can stop us now. Ethan, Mia and Zoe are going to escape this hell together. Well, that's how it should have gone. You know him, you love him, it's your favourite weapon enthusiast, come back from the dead. Jack Baker is here for one final round, only this time he's enormous. He looks like a giant slug constructed out of mold with eyes popping out all over his body that Ethan will need to aim for if he'd like to inflict any damage. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Jack's monstrous design, but I understand why it was necessary. They could have just had Jack show up like normal, but if they'd done that, then Ethan, Mia, and Zoe could have just run away. So having Jack be some kind of monster forces Ethan into fighting. It's not the worst fight in the world, and Jack's design is actually pretty decent. I'm just not fond of it. Returning to the battle, which reaches a climax once Ethan destroys all of Jack's eyes, Jack attempts one last attack using all of the strength he has left, and with no other choice, Ethan uses one of the vaccines Zoe made just before Jack showed up, to cure him, leaving the group with only one vaccine. It's either Mia or Zoe.
Is this some sick joke? I've come this far. We've come this far, and now I've got to pick between Mia and Zoe. Of course I'm going to pick Mia. She's my wife, for crying out loud. But if Zoe stays here, what the fuck's going to happen to her? No matter what, someone is going to die, and I'll be damned if it's Mia.
I chose Mia for my playthrough, although if I would have chosen Zoe, then I'd receive the bad ending, in which Ethan is forced to fight with Mia, thus killing her in the process. It's an interesting ending and an alright encounter. I just can't stand fighting with a crowbar, so most of the time I'll set off with Mia, who isn't exactly the most grateful person in the world, but Mia's attitude will be the last thing we need to worry about. Whilst passing through the swampy waters of Louisiana, we'll eventually come across a giant ship that dwarfs our tiny vessel, but before we can even begin to comprehend how this ship ended up in its current state, mold erupts from beneath the water, causing Ethan and Mia to become separated. The screen quickly fades to black as Ethan loses consciousness. Upon waking up, we'll realise that we're now playing as Mia, and we are somehow on the large ship from before. Mia's first thought is of Ethan, but after reaching him, mold will appear dragging him away, leaving Mia to explore the wreckage all by herself. Getting to play as Mia is an enjoyable change of pace in my opinion. For the entirety of RE7, we've watched Ethan grow stronger and stronger with every new confrontation, which has made us a little cocky. We're able to escape every difficult situation by simply shooting at it, but playing as Mia provides a whole different challenge. She's frail, she's confused, and she's defenseless, so you'll need to sneak around enemies opposed to fighting them, which can make areas much more intense. Unfortunately, the ship leaves much to be desired. We see Mia's memories slowly coming back to her, and every so often we'll find a molded creeping around, but I think the ship could have been used to a fuller extent. We're on a partially flooded ship, so maybe they could have added a moment where Mia has to dive underwater. And yes, I realise that amoeba exist, but hey, that didn't stop Ethan whilst in the guest house, and in case you've forgotten, this game is full of giant mold men, so I'd like to imagine that non-infected water isn't too unbelievable. I don't know whether or not I'm nitpicking here, I just think this section could have been handled much better. Anyways, it isn't long until Mia is able to find the girl that was calling out to her when their boat capsized. She instructs Mia to watch another tape titled Old Videotape that shows where Mia has been all these years. Mia was a handler for the first successful E-type bioweapon known as Evelyn. She was responsible for transporting Evelyn with her partner Alan Droney to a facility in Central America, until Evelyn killed Alan and turned everyone else on board into molded. We even see Mia recording the message from the beginning of the game, telling Ethan not to come and find her. I really enjoy this tape. It ties everything together pretty well, and it shows how the ship found itself in such a state. But the best thing to come from this tape is Mia's badass awakening. Ever since the beginning of RE7, Mia has been helpless, but now she's a completely different person. She's full of determination to get her husband back, and nobody, not even Evelyn, can stop her, especially now that she has Evelyn's tissue sample. Mia starts to explore in an attempt to reach the bowels of the ship, as she knows that's where she'll find Ethan. It's not the most exciting expedition, but upon reaching Ethan, we're treated to a dream sequence with everybody's favourite weapon enthusiast, Jack Baker. Or is it a dream? Jack explains to Ethan that Evelyn is the reason that his family and Mia were out of control, but Jack talks about Evelyn sympathetically, almost like she still has some control over him, or Jack's that nice of a person that he can sympathise with someone that's destroyed his family. However, this explanation is quickly put to an end when Mia begins ripping chunks of mould off of Ethan's face, but with Evelyn in close proximity, Mia doesn't have any time to waste, so she pushes Ethan out of the room, simultaneously forcing the tissue sample into his hand and locking the door behind her. While Ethan watches Mia get covered in mould, he realises that there's only one thing to do, and that is to kill Evelyn.
I'm putting an end to this, for Mia and the Bakers. Even if it's the last thing I do. Evelyn, I'm coming for you.
We are now back to playing as Ethan with his lust for vengeance, but not knowing his exact destination, he heads off the ship and into the swamp, wading through rotting fish corpses en route to a nearby shack. This dilapidated place resembles some form of military base, where Ethan finds a radio. Upon closer inspection, Ethan can hear two men's voices discussing their search for the Bakers and Evelyn. We know these people are aiming for the same goal as Ethan because of their closing statement.
If you encounter Evelyn, orders are shoot to kill. Repeat, shoot to kill.
But for the time being, Ethan is unable to contact these men, so he simply continues his hunt. After leaving the scruffy shack, Ethan begins taking down Molded on his way to the salt mines, where we'll find plenty of Lucas's trademark booby traps, and plenty of Molded to boot. However, Ethan can't be stopped. No matter how many traps or Molded come at him, he's able to defeat every one of them until he reaches the lab. While in the lab, Ethan is able to make a necrotoxin out of Evelyn's tissue sample. So finally, Ethan has the capacity to kill Evelyn. But of course, she's not going to make that easy. The salt mines become flooded with Molded, but the biggest challenge along the way is two chunky boys. Let me explain. Right before Ethan is able to escape the salt mines, we're confronted with two fat Molded just like the one we met in the barn. They're relatively tough, but as long as you play it safe, then you shouldn't have a problem beating them. And once they're out of the way, it's time for the ultimate fight with Evelyn. The final battle will be taking place in the guest house. Everything has come full circle, but while on our way to Evelyn, we're plagued with hallucinations of Mia attacking us, likely brought on by Evelyn, although she's unable to summon any more Molded, so outside of some rather traumatic illusions, the only way of stopping Ethan from giving her the necrotoxin is by pushing him backwards. Which doesn't have much of an effect, and we're able to see her physically aging whilst Ethan approaches her, but the big twist comes after we inject Evelyn with the necrotoxin. The screen gets really bright before it's revealed that Evelyn is actually Grandma Baker. This entire time we thought that Evelyn was a little girl, but in reality, she's an old woman. Her body begins turning into sludge before covering the room in mold, and when she reappears, she's basically turned into a giant worm with a somewhat human face, a monster that Ethan must eradicate. In her new form, she blocks all exits and begins advancing towards Ethan. No amount of bullets can stop her, so eventually she'll grab Ethan and fling him outside. With military helicopters circling the area from above, Evelyn's worm-like body starts emerging from the roof of the guest house, and thankfully for Ethan, the soldiers piloting those very helicopters are willing to lend him a hand. A gun drops down from above known as the Albert 01, which is especially effective against Evelyn. So after emptying the round into Evelyn's face, she turns into a crystal substance, much like Marguerite once we beat her. But now isn't the time to dwell on such things. A soldier named Chris Redfield walks over to Ethan and helps him to his feet. Next thing we know, Ethan is being reunited with Mia, who we were led to believe was dead, and they basically fly off into the sunset together. The end. Now, there's a few things I'd like to talk about before the end of this video. Firstly, I'd like to say that I haven't played any of the DLC for this game. I appreciate that some of the DLC is really important for Lucas's character, and one of them resolves Zoe's story, but there is far too many DLC for RE7, 8 to be exact, so I've decided not to play them all. But that's fine. Even though I haven't played every DLC, I still feel I have a good understanding of every character. Lucas may still be mysterious, but I can figure out so much about him from the main game alone. He's obviously the real villain. Before Evelyn showed up, he'd already killed someone, and even though he was still somewhat in control of his own actions, he left his family to suffer out of pure selfishness. Lastly, I'd quickly like to cover the giant baby from Resident Evil Village. I've said that RE7 is pure nightmare fuel, but when the baby shows up in RE8, it's considerably scarier than anything RE7 does. So why am I talking about this game instead of RE8? Well, even though the baby is horrifying, it's only in RE8 for about 10 minutes, and after that it's gone. RE7 is consistently more scary than RE8, so even though it managed to create an incredibly scary experience, it still doesn't compare to RE7. But that's just about it for this video. Yes, we finally reached the end, and it certainly ended up being longer than I originally thought, but I've really enjoyed making it. Although it has taken a while, so if you've enjoyed in any way, then please consider smashing that like button, leaving a comment down below, and hitting that big red subscribe button with the bell on, because it would really help me out on my way to 1,000 subs. But that's all from me, so goodbye to you lovely, lovely people.